In Mortal Kombat 1, Mileena's arc comes to a boiling point, and we witness the climax of her self-actualization due to when we join her on her journey. But what led up to this point? What has built the trials and tribulations we see her tackle in the story? Her journey to Empress, the internal and external battle with Tarkat, family dynamics and the stress associated with all of it. These are things woven deep within Mileena's identity, bringing life to the foundation she stands on. Today, I'll try and unravel Mileena's untold past, to find what exactly influenced her during her upbringing to shape her mindset going forward, and how that all connects to what we see on screen. Now, topics like these often require speculation, inferences, headcanon, and all of the sort, so feel free to drop your own interpretation of Mileena's untold past down below. And lastly, some of the ideas explored here are from friend of the show, Marquise. With that said, let's begin.
You wanted to know where I've been? Now you'll find out.
From the first time we see Mileena in the story, you can get an idea of the life she's lived. Especially when next to her twin sister, Kitana, you see differences in their appearance that shape a more tattered feel to Mileena. The scar on her right eyebrow, her hairstyle and headpiece, even the lack of visual metal pieces gives a more tactical look compared to Kitana. She has this almost rough vibe to her from the start, giving the impression that she has major lived experiences outside of the story we actually see. Before tackling those, I'd like to start with one of the fundamental upsets of Mileena's upbringing, the pressure and conditions that come with being a royal. Being the firstborn of the twins, the heir to the throne, the responsibility of Empress is hammered into her mind non-stop. The expectations she must live up to alone can give her stress, and the climate of being an Outworld royal is not any help. We know from Li Mei that even Sindel felt the palace a prison, with Mileena sharing a similar sentiment, feeling her life is never her own, sort of the Elsa and Anna effect, having visually everything on paper being royalty, but living through terrors to achieve it. And this can come from the obvious rules they must abide by to create this perfect image, but it extends to more than just their own responsibilities. We have to remember this is Mileena during her youth. The things she sees around her in her upbringing can determine how she approaches things and grows. For example, her cousins being banished. Assuming similar events took place in her youth, I'd imagine that was not at all pleasant for her. Losing a family member over something she may not even understand yet, and even if she did, they were banished by a higher power, or a rule that is out of her control, being enforced by her own mother or father, or things such as court, the corrupt politics and awful snakes that reside there. What will the archdukes take issue with next? This endless battle for acceptance and appeal, ever so slightly draining the psyche of Mileena. And as she grows, her motives and desires do too, sprouting new issues from these royal necessities, like the pressure to produce an heir. I assume it's not only pushed onto her frequently, but is unavoidable at times. I can definitely see them having a suitor lineup of sorts, having to choose or at least consider one of many men as the right partner to join her on the throne. This is obviously not in her best interests, as she adapts feelings for her dearest Tanya, not another Outworld royal, let alone a man to produce an heir with. But even those feelings have fundamental wrong in them, at least in the view of the royal family. Entanglements with Ungadi are strictly forbidden, after all. But when you're in Mileena's shoes, I'm sure everything you desire begins to feel a little forbidden. These issues can only increase in complexity as she grows and gains understanding of her individual needs. And though these conditions, through repetition, may have become easier to accept, they never became ideal. As even in the main story, we know she secretly left the palace unattended to, quote, get away from all this, resulting in her Tarkat affliction, only creating more turmoil for her. And in truth, living this way for over 10,000 years, her perception of some things must have been ultimately skewed, whether that's her confidence in her own worth, or even how she should feel or not feel affected by some things, as if it's not worth her time or pain that she should fight through rather than dwell on. Especially as her Tarkat affliction manifests or her father, Emperor Jerrod, passes away, the weight of her own internal struggle can seem moot to others. And though that can be caused by Outworld's strict rules for their heir, it spreads to things much more intimate, like her own mother, Sindel, who yes is trying her best as Empress, and she loves her daughters immensely, family, but also at the same time neglects her own daughter's needs because what's more important is the image of the royal family. Of course, this conflict evolves in the main story, but given her years and years of life, things such as the scene in chapter 3 with Sindel and Kitana seem more like a frequent occurrence and not a one and done deal. Sindel blaming Mileena for her disease, taking away her ability to prove herself at the tournament, telling her she never thinks, and Kitana desperately trying to remedy this as much as she can, but ultimately missing the mark. Both of them were so caught up with what would happen due to the rules, not acknowledging Mileena and her ongoing dilemma. Mother is only trying to protect you, sister. If your disease becomes known, you will be banished to the wastes, as if upholding that rule, keeping her in the shadows, is more important than accommodating for her obvious distress. Now, these issues can start due to royal rules and complexities, but this is more so where her actual relationships start to affect and shape her. Conditioning is integral in Mileena's adolescence, but the relationships, the bonds, the people in her life have a huge impact on her worldview. It's these relationships and experiences that remedy or even amplify the tension of her upbringing. So with that said, let's dive more into that. What makes Mileena so good in MK1 is that the hurdles she must overcome are already a major part of her identity before the story even begins. She enters the story with pre-existing motives, flaws, and struggles, and a major part in birthing these is the history she has with several characters. To piggyback off the chapter 3 scene I mentioned, I think it's best to tackle Sindel first. Sindel is an undeniable constant in Mileena's life, both as her mother and as a driving force in her internal conflict. The chapter 3 scene does paint a decent picture for how Sindel perceived Mileena in the immediate past and for certain present. The way she talks to her, blaming her for a traumatic accident, saying the reasoning is beyond her understanding. The entire tone from her is at least being rude and at most a display of total mistrust. And with Mileena's outward reaction, I get the feeling this is a sentiment from her mother she is frequently at odds with. Even if we assume her Tarkat affliction only happened recently, the last 5 to 500 years or so, a similar pressure from Sindel was definitely still present. In an intro with Kitana, Sindel says there are times she wishes Kitana was born first, something she rightfully rejects, understanding and sympathizing with her twin. But nonetheless, this doubt from Sindel is apparent, and Mileena feels this. I mean, obviously, she can't help but feel it. She blatantly says she feels doubted by Sindel in an intro, and to imagine the build-up this has and how it's shaped over time is almost scary. This pressure to fit as the rightful heir, starting from the second she was born, was already so much. So when that same pressure evolves into something far worse, like fitting as the rightful daughter, I can't fathom the effects of that, especially growing up. Sindel practically crafted everything she knows. I mean, she's more than just a mother to the princesses. She's the mother of Outworld. The effects of unacceptance, not being good enough, feeling unworthy, these can give real, tangible scars to your development, especially from the most important person in her realm, especially from her mother. And I want to say this at least once before the video continues, but I never intend to mischaracterize others throughout this process. Like, obviously, Sindel loves her daughters deeply and did what she felt was best, etc. I'm just trying to tackle this from a completely Mileena lens, if that makes sense. But to continue, this level of stress brewing within her, even now, is harmful, and to think it's been a constant for years is something that undoubtedly weighed on her over time, which is why you see things like her leaving emotionally distressing scenarios in the main story when she knows there is no good way out of it, or rather, when she feels she won't be understood or heard out. This does show Mileena feeling right in her emotions though, which of course, valid, but when she was younger, I'm sure it wasn't as easy. Your mental fortitude in adolescence isn't the strongest, and you can easily believe the doubt placed into you and succumb to those harmful thoughts. But Mileena does eventually, as we see from the story, gain this motive to prove everyone wrong. Even if it's her own mother, the people at court, the dozens of Edenians who think Kitana is more fit as heir. These serve as real physical things she must reform, but the non-physical things, her mentality, is something she's had to battle with, and like I said, more than likely change, as it's not easy to stick up for yourself in her shoes, but it's also something that became easier with age and confidence. I like to think a big push in her life that helped her gain this sense of self and her motivations is the other people around her, the ones she found comfort in. Not that she didn't with her mother, but the turmoil from their relationship and the pressure of being Heir was inevitably going to enable her to find other people or things to help her cope with these emotions. One of the most important being Li Mei. So with that said, let's tackle Miss Prevail herself.
My loyalty to your family hasn't. Trust me now as you did then.
I've wanted to talk about Li Mei and Mileena's relationship forever, pretty much. It's one of the more polarizing plot points within the story, and is of course integral to both characters' arcs. What's so fun about talking about it here is the nature of their relationship on screen. The story makes it very clear that they were on better terms in the past, and that's something that I'm sure meant a lot to Mileena back then. Especially in a time where her main female role model may have not been the best, I imagine she found great comfort within Li Mei's guidance. I like to believe it somehow remedied some of the pain from her mother, especially considering how close Li Mei was to the royal family. Understanding the tribulations Sindel went through, I see her sympathizing deeply with Mileena. She understood her and gave her the time of day. Where she may have otherwise felt doubt, Li Mei uplifted Mileena, gave her her trust, which was at a time mutual. Before the Jerrod incident, we do know Mileena trusted Li Mei. In chapter 10, we get to see this tackled in a beautiful clash of passion and grief, seeing Li Mei desperately try to reach her best friend and her daughters. Most importantly here, Mileena, of course. Li Mei dolefully expresses her sentiment. Trust me now as you did then, as Mileena battles for everything she feels necessary to finally prove herself. You can really feel what was lost here. Their relationship, that bond. It feels like these characters are missing a pivotal part of their happiness due to the divide we witness in the main story, only amplifying the feeling I have that this relationship was intrinsic to Mileena's early development. Another thing here that I love is her mention of teaching Mileena the exact techniques she uses against Li Mei in chapter 10. We've already established a potential level of favoritism from Sindel towards Kitana, and if not favoritism, just a lack of trust in Mileena or her ability, and I think this may very well be a part of that. In mid-match dialogue, Kitana says she fights like her mother. From my understanding, Mileena doesn't say this anywhere, and it can explain a potential fondness gained by Sindel for Kitana's approach, because it's like hers. But Mileena's? I mean, watch chapter 10. She fights like Li Mei. It's one of my favorite details, albeit small, but I'm almost certain it's intentional. In that chapter, you don't get to see Kitana fight Li Mei prior to the in-game battle, but with Mileena, you do. You not only see her begin to ambush Li Mei, but you see that they are on the same wavelength, matching each other's every move. It's an intimate fight, really. It isn't until Mileena mixes up Li Mei that she finally breaks up the even brawl, which is directly followed by Li Mei saying, "I remember teaching you that, princess. You were but a girl," showing just how important these teachings were to Mileena, but also how she's learned from them and evolved, resulting in her breaking it up. What makes it even better though is that Li Mei does the exact same thing afterwards. As the second brawl ensues, they are once again even, reading each other perfectly, until Li Mei ultimately mixes up Mileena. If anyone knows how these characters fight, it's each other, and they showcase that gracefully here. What I'm getting at though is the obvious bond here that was only severed much later in Mileena's life. So a large portion of her life was met with Li Mei being a great teacher, role model, and mentor, building up that confidence she needed at a younger age to clear up the fog at least a little bit to make her journey much easier, to make her feel not alone. I personally perceive Li Mei as a wise and patient person, bringing those values to the princesses the best she can, whether that's training or family events while she's around, or even one-on-one conversations with Mileena at times when she needed it. Again, giving her guidance that otherwise may have felt impossible to gain. Things as simple as her hairstyle being more like Li Mei as well, along with other smaller things that may be reaching, of course, just all lead me to truly feel that she was was almost infectious in Mileena's early life. As for when she lost her during the Jerrod Incident, that's an entire other world of shock and grief that I will cover later in this video. Before that though, how about some other important people in her life, like her twin sister, her other half, Princess Kitana.
Who told you? No one. I have eyes.
Kitana is one of, if not the most important person in Mileena's life. Even if that isn't entirely displayed to us in the main story, I mean, think about it. Her twin sister, living and breathing the exact same life she is in most aspects. Especially in their youth, they both had to carry the same struggles and experience the same fond memories. It's the other half aspect of their relationship that gives me full confidence in this idea. To bring it back once again, the chapter 3 scene. The way Mileena's entire demeanor shifts when talked to by Kitana, it means something. She knows if anyone has her best interests in mind, it's her. She's been able to talk to her for hours in her youth about various problems, along with interests and everything else. Kitana does understand her sister, or at least what she's going through, but at the same time, it's still a struggle to be fully understood in the state she's in during the main story's events, which is why you see it happen once again in chapter 7. It comes as this shock almost, that Kitana knows of Mileena's feelings towards Tanya. It's a comforting shock though, at least in my interpretation. Much like the scene in chapter 3, the Shivaranatai scene mirrors a similar interaction between the sisters. Kitana understands her sister's feelings, but as the conversation continues, the endpoint is still about responsibilities that must be upheld, opposed to a full acceptance and understanding of Mileena's ongoing dilemma. For now, you cannot jeopardize your ascension, is the final sentence spoken from Kitana that further presses Mileena toward that wall. This wall of responsibility that feels higher and more demanding than her own needs, resulting in her leaving, just like she did in chapter 3. Now these scenes are still very important for what they show is the regular for the twins. Kitana trying to reassure Mileena that she can change the Ungadi's rules, not telling her she's wrong for her feelings, but rather what she's putting at risk. I feel this is something that only increased with their age, that desire to uphold royal standards. I'm sure when they were kids, irresponsible or immature kids at that, they were able to hear each other out entirely without worry of a cultural structure making things feel out of grasp. The way they converse is very affectionate. They want to try and soften blows for each other when they can, and want to show that they are there for each other. I like to believe, even though she was only seconds older, that Mileena tried to take care of Kitana. Even if only mentally, I'm sure that intent was there. That's why scenes like in chapter 4, where Kitana arrives to see a battered post-Tarkat outbreak Mileena, I feel the way she handles that is extremely important. You can see the fear in her eyes, the genuine worry and cognizance for her sister. Like seeing each other in any harm is some of the worst things they've had to experience. And Mileena would react the exact same way, and probably has in the past over even smaller things. Like if Kitana got a scratch while training with Li Mei, you best know Mileena was stopping that immediately to attend to her twin. It's just an overall thing I feel is safe to say was possible and probably frequent, the way they care and look out for each other. I mean, again, the main story doesn't give much for the two, but that's why certain scenes I feel should be taken for what they set up in a grand scale, like habit forming, etc. As again, we are seeing these characters 10k odd years into their lives. Kitana was there through everything, all this pressure Mileena dealt with, which was of course at times mutual, but knowing her sister as well as she does, seeing the responsibility and potential turmoil of the heir to the throne, that sympathy and understanding is pretty unmatched. One last thing for them is the level of respect, honestly, especially from Kitana to her sister, watching her entire life up to ascension, going through the trials that presents. You see this major level of respect for Mileena, and with Kitana becoming a war general to help serve alongside her, I only imagine that will increase as well. With that said though, I think it's time to move on to Mileena's dearest, the fearless leader of the Ungadi, Tanya.
No, Tanya, stay down. This time, I protect you.
Finally, we get to talk about Tanya, Mileena's canon lover in the new era. I really do enjoy their relationship, and for Mileena's past, I feel it did dictate a lot for who she is in the main story. I see Tanya as this driving force in Mileena's self-actualization growing up. From their scenes in chapter 12 alone, you see full acceptance and care for one another. They even reference past events, albeit not much in the grand scheme of things, but it's really up to you. Mileena says, "This time, I protect you." Of course, this is due to the obvious. Tanya is Ungadi. It is her job to protect the royal family. But Mileena obviously doesn't look at this as some sort of debt or some structural constant that means little. She feels security from Tanya, and that's something she wants to reciprocate whenever possible. The mutual love, dedication, and loyalty to one another in the main story makes me believe that despite the forbidden nature of their relationship, this bond was established much earlier on, or at least through pivotal events in their lives. Could Mileena have been sneaking out to find comfort in her dearest Tanya when she gained her Tarkat affliction? I feel that's very possible, as even Sindel says the reason she left that night was beyond her. And then Mileena's reaction to Kitana knowing her feelings towards Tanya shows that it wasn't common knowledge, of course. Intros show us that Sindel had to find out about their relationship, and that she even has issues with it, so it wasn't something she expected her to sneak out for. Just a thought though, there may be no correlation. But even if that isn't the case, with Outworld being the way it is, with women basically making the whole thing work, I'm sure Mileena found great admiration and inspiration in these figures. Like I'd said with Sindel or Li Mei, there's such a healthy amount of strong female role models within Outworld, or Adenia. You get what I mean. And I like to think of Mileena, and Kitana for that matter, admiring their strength and looking up to them in their youth. I'm saying this because maybe this is how Mileena gained interest in Tanya. Huge shout out to Marquise and their one-shot spectators for giving me this visualization. But the idea of Mileena having this intrigue with Tanya that may have only started due to her interest with the Ungadi, but slowly turned into much more than that, is something I love. Helping Mileena fully realize herself and her emotions, what and who she's attracted to. It just feels so natural for the princesses to look over the Ungadi warriors. But for Mileena, she gained a spark from Tanya over time and became enamored with her, which in time gave her a partner, a home within another person, something I'm sure that helped her greatly through her troubles and allowed her to fully experience herself and real love. It's so cute to think of how she may have admired the Ungadi warriors, being proud of them, and then gaining pride in having one of those same Ungadi warriors as her dearest, even when all the odds are against them. Even if their existence has fundamental wrong within their society, their love burned too bright for it to dim and fade away.
Punishment. It was not her fault.
I think it's time we finally talk about Emperor Jerrod, Mileena's father, who had passed before the events of the main story. Very early on in the story mode, in chapter 3, you get to see just how much Jerrod means to Mileena. Even in the presence of a demigod, being Liu Kang, she has immediate issue with potential scrutiny of her father's festival. This was not at all Liu Kang's intention here, saying, "Her Majesty once again spares no expense on the festival," but Mileena, being quick to defend the festival as it commemorates her late father, follows up Liu with an immediate, "Should she not?" then explains the commemoration. The scene is actually important for multiple reasons. It establishes Mileena's unwavering love for her father, but also gives us an idea as to how long he has been gone, as Mileena and Liu both imply that this wasn't the first festival, and we know these happened to commemorate Jerrod's passing. Assuming that the Earthrealm vs. Outworld tournaments also take place during each festival now, it has been dead for some time, as every time the tournament is mentioned in intros, just like the original timelines, it is explained to have a large gap between them. Like one where Li Mei tells Raiden he will only be able to fight her again at the next tournament if he lives that long. And the same thing occurs in an intro with Sindel and Kung Lao. With this in mind, Jerrod has been gone for quite some time, especially in human life standards. Though for Adenians it wouldn't be as much, I'd still assume it's 100+ years or so at least. This helps paint a picture as to how long the turmoil from his passing has affected Mileena and the royal family. This wasn't just the loss of Jerrod, it was the loss of structure, of family, of Li Mei even. Mileena's entire story and her internal battles are heavily influenced by this event. Chapter 10 with Li Mei her reunion with Jerrod in chapter 12. You see the way this has changed Mileena and everyone else around her. To touch on their relationship while he was living, I've always thought he may have been a very understanding parent, having patience with his daughters, and wife as well, of course. Though he undoubtedly had the royal pressure and circumstances, similarly to Sindel, I do believe Sindel held a bit more power, maybe. It's hard to tell, as the mural of Sindel and Jerrod depicts them as pretty even, being emperor and empress. But when he returns in the main story, he tells Sindel he is hers to command. This doesn't ultimately change much, but I can see scenarios where if Sindel was too harsh or was focused on her responsibilities, Jerrod may have been there to comfort his daughters. Not in some bad parent, good parent way, but more so understanding all of their family struggles so deeply that he is perfectly capable of softening the blow from these issues, minor, major, and otherwise. In Mileena's adolescence, having the presence of both parents definitely strengthened her mental fortitude. She had people to rely on, to look up to, essentially how any of us look at our parental figures. But on top of that, for the princesses, these are also the most powerful and famous people ever, pretty much. It's the sense of security gained by having Jerrod there as well. I mean, even with his short inclusion in the story, you can get a leader vibe from him, like he understands what's happening and how to potentially work through it. Having that in your immediate life as a child, especially for our little misunderstood Mileena, the security and guidance this brought made her life much better, or so we can assume. Losing him so suddenly could not have been easy at all, especially in the climates of Outworld, where you basically do wrong and be killed or banished for it. The derogation of Li Mei could not have been pretty. And though the princesses, of course, believed she was at fault as everyone else did, it doesn't change the traumatic experience that came from it, and of course from the death itself. Li Mei was another family member to them. For Mileena, she was an integral role model. Having to completely change your perception of someone who's practically created part of who you are is terrifying in the least. I mean, between this, her own grief, watching Kitana and Sindel's grief, and all of Outworld on top of that, even though she was much older here, at least I think, it probably makes it no better. Maybe even worse, ripping apart a structure that was established so long ago. Nobody likes uncertainty. People love being comfortable. Imagine finding out the closest person in your life was actually a horrible person and you can never see them in positive circumstances ever again. It's tough to think about on paper, let alone live it like Mileena and the royal family had to. Tiny headcanon to end this topic off a bit more positive, but I imagine Jerrod tried to treat Mileena and Kitana to sweets or some other Outworld delicacy during times where their mother may have been busy. Imagine the twins with their father going to some Outworld La Michoacana or something. Like, come on, it's a cute thought.
Whoa. Calm down.
The final topic for this video will be Mileena's Tarkat affliction, one of her main external and internal conflicts within the main story. Now, to apply it to this video, there isn't a whole lot to say that isn't explained or expressed better within the main story. We can safely assume that Outworld's rules and Sindel's prejudices remained intact in the past, and were maybe even stronger back then. What makes it so important once Mileena gains her affliction is, of course, those prejudices now apply to her own daughter. And this is something unwavering for multiple reasons, whether that's Sindel's age, Outworld's more conservative structures, the potential past effects of Tarkatans, Vaternians, and more. As we do know this is a golden age for Outworld, we can assume they faced far worse times, where monsters roamed or laws weren't abided by, etc. But for Mileena here, I imagine it was a plethora of emotions she still even struggles to fathom. It isn't until her tower ending that she tries to burn these bridges and take a progressive approach with Tarkat victims. So everything before that was something she battled on her own, even internally for the most part, like feeling she may have failed Outworld and her family, now gaining something as a permanent effect on her life that her own mother actively takes issue with. It's almost weaponized against her, intentionally or not, due to the way it's perceived in the world. I can only imagine how it was when she first let her family know, if it was even consensual, as I can easily see it being a Tarkat outburst that let her family know the unfortunate truth, making her feel like a complete monster if she didn't already. Again, there isn't a whole lot I can say here that wouldn't be better explained in an analysis of the story content or what is actually shown in the story mode. So as for the Tarkat topic, I'll leave that here, though we do know the turmoil and trauma that Mileena experienced after gaining her affliction. That is an undeniable fact to her character, but feel free to comment any of your headcanons or ways you perceive it happening as she gains that affliction and has to battle it. With all that said, this has been Mileena's Untold Past. Thank you all so much for watching to this point. Videos like these have so much freedom with them that if I continued, I'd never stop. It leaves room for a ton of speculation, that even here I chose to limit some things to not get overzealous. This isn't Mileena's main video by any means, and truthfully this topic itself can be expanded upon if that's something you would all be interested in. I adore Mileena and MK1, and this was a fun video to make, so I hope all of you enjoyed. I do feel a bit bad not covering Tarkat fully, but it is because I do have another video I want to do on it, as well as how integral that is to Mileena's actual main story presence, so it'll be a big part of her main story analysis. Thank you all again so much for the support, and with that said, that's basically it. Ladies, gentlemen, and NB beauties, make sure you all stay safe and stay hydrated. Oh, and stream Bubblegum, that's coming to streaming platforms soon. Support Newjeans. I will see you all in the next one. Bye-bye.